Spiders Will Eat Your Face. Available on Amazon Prime Instant Watch and Amazon.com. Spiders Will Eat Your Face. The brilliant documentary about the history of pet tarantulas in America. That's Spiders Will Eat Your Face, the movie, now on Amazon.
Success. Media. Network. 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 Network.
This is your show.
Good day, Successors. I'm Antonio Holman, and welcome to the 4 Principles of Success, number 31, where I chat with successful people and entrepreneurs about how they enhance their businesses and lives in the areas of knowledge, health, wealth, and spirituality. Today, we're talking to Perry Marshall. Perry is located in Chicago, Illinois, and is a speaker, engineer, and world-renowned business consultant to over 300 industries, from computer hardware and software to finance and biotech. With a degree in electrical engineering and a decade of research, as well as being the author of 80/20 Sales and Marketing and Evolution 2.0, Breaking the Deadlock Between Darwin and Design, he brings a fresh perspective to the 150-year evolution debate. Just as Bill Gates of Microsoft and the founders of Google revolutionized software and the internet through their status as outsiders, Perry similarly harnesses a communication engineer's outsider's perspective to reveal a century of unrecognized research and discoveries. Perry, are you ready to help our listeners prepare for success?
I am. Evolution is a very important topic for people who want to be successful, but it normally hasn't been. And as we go into this today, I think we're going to connect some dots where you're going to go, you know, I always wondered about that, but nobody ever explained it to me, and you're going to hear a correct explanation today.
Great. I'm ready to get into this. Okay, so before we get started, how about you give us a little insight into your everyday personal life?
Well, I'm a business and marketing consultant. I'm best known for writing the world's best book on internet advertising, which is the ultimate guide to Google AdWords. And so I've worked in hundreds of industries, all kinds of different things. I've also got a wife and 6 kids here in Chicago, and it's bedlam here. Everybody's here. I work at home. The kids are at home, and the neighbors all like to come over. And our philosophy of the kids is, if we buy the pizza, then the kids are at our house eating pizza instead of making meth somewhere down the street. So, buy the pizza, and then you know where your kids are. So, it's kind of a loud, crazy place. I do shut the door and do interviews and stuff, but it's good to be here with you today, and we're going to have a good time.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so for those who may not know, tell us a little bit more about the book Evolution 2.0 and what initially inspired you to create it. Well,
it was inspired by an argument in the back of a bus in southwestern China.
Wow.
My younger brother he graduated from a very conservative seminary where he got a theology degree, and then he moved to China where he was teaching English part of the time and being a missionary part of the time. And in the space of 4 years, he went from being a card-carrying right-wing Christian to being almost atheist. And Now, and our dad was a minister, and I was a Christian too. I wasn't, quite as maybe conservative as he was, but still, we're having this argument. We're very close, and he's very smart, and he's kind of deconstructing this whole thing, and I'm like, hey, wait a minute, not so fast. And this had been going on for quite a while, and at one point in the conversation, I flipped over into science, which he and I had never really gotten into that before because he's not a science guy, but I'm an electrical engineer. And I said, hey, dude, I said, look at the hand at the end of your arm. I said, this is a fine piece of engineering. I said, you don't think that is actually some accumulation of random accidents, do you? He's like, hang on a second. Hold on with that. Yeah, it is. And he proceeded to go into this whole explanation, which all of us have kind of heard before, okay? And his explanation was, hey, listen, Perry, if there's a billion falcons flying around for 100 million years, and occasionally one of them gets some mutation in its DNA and it makes it see better and it can hunt better, then it out-hunts all the other falcons, and then the falcons get better, and you don't need a designer, and you don't and you get amazing engineering and no God necessary. And I listened to that and I was like, well, I don't really think that sounds right. However, I did know one thing. I knew that most biologists would more likely agree with him than me. And I knew I didn't have a biology degree, and I knew I didn't know. And so at that moment, I just resolved to find out, because we had been going back and forth about all these kind of squishy theological questions. And I'm like, well, this is a scientific question, and I have a rock solid scientific education. I know how to read a scientific paper. I know how to do math. I could do all that stuff. I don't know biology, but I can learn it. You know what? I'm going to go find out about this. And I flung myself into the void. I said, this whole thing might make me an atheist. Like, I don't know. I don't know where this is going to go, but I'm going to find out. And so I doubled down, and I started buying books like crazy, and I started reading articles and going all over the internet and downloading papers. And I really went crazy with the thing. And there were a couple of questions that I knew that I needed somebody who was going to have to answer for me to be convinced that he was anywhere close to right. So at that point, you might say, if you wanted a label, you might have called me an old Earth creationist. Like, oh yeah, I know the Earth is millions of years old. There's no question about that. But as to how life got here, it kind of looks pretty miraculous to me. So I don't really know, but I'm an engineer, and I know engineering when I see it. And here's the question that I kind of reduced this to. Said, okay, if all you need is millions of years and millions of mutant copies of stuff, and everything just gets better and better and better and better, if that's really true, how come they didn't teach me that in engineering school? In 5.5 years of electrical engineering school, and by the way, I specialized in communication systems and control systems, and control systems is all about how you optimize stuff. It's like you have a big system, and it's got this big diagram, and there are all these lines going all over the place. And nobody ever, anywhere in my engineering degree, nobody ever said, if you got a not optimum system and you want to optimize it, you just make millions of copies. You make sure some of the copies have mistakes, and occasionally it'll get better. That idea is completely foreign in engineering. It doesn't exist. And I'm like, there is some disconnect between the engineers and the biologists. Either the engineers know something the biologists don't know, or the biologists know something the engineers don't know. What is it? And I went deep. I bought hundreds of books. I read thousands of scientific papers. And 13 years later, I've got a book in the bookstores and on Amazon called Evolution 2.0, Breaking the Deadlock Between Darwin and Design. And what I found, I could have never predicted when I started. I found things that were so surprising and so amazing. And what I really found was that when you listen to these two sides argue with each other, neither one of them is right.
Oh, that's very interesting you say it that way. Neither one of them are right. Does it feel like there's just tons of holes in both arguments?
Well, there are. Now, actually, each side is about a third right.
Oh, I see. Okay,
each side is about a third right, and there's this whole other piece in the middle that a good, competent biologist of today does know, but the public doesn't hear anything about. Okay, and what I said about, so why didn't they teach this to me in engineering school? Like, why didn't they teach random mutation, natural selection, and survival of the fittest to me in engineering school, like this is how you fix every problem. Never came up. Again, do the biologists know something the engineers don't know? Do the engineers know something the biologists don't know? You know what the answer is? Neither.
Wow.
The answer is the cells know something that none of us know.
Mm-hmm.
That's the truth. That's the truth, and you can write it in blood. And this really took me quite a while to sort out. In fact, it was probably at least 2 or 3 years of digging and reading and digging and reading and consistently going, you know what? I still don't feel like I've got this right. Like, I'd read people on the left and I'd read people on the right, and I would read, they would almost sound convincing. But then my motto though was ignore no verifiable fact. And you might say it's like I had this chalkboard and I kept putting things on it like, okay, we know that we know that we know this, and we know that we know that we know that. And it was like there was this big mystery in the middle. It was like, what would actually make all of this make sense? And what I finally want, maybe 2 years into this guy emailed me a paper, and he goes, Perry, you might enjoy this. And it was a paper by a guy named James Shapiro, who is a geneticist at the University of Chicago, who's got a very distinguished career. And it was talking about how cells edit their own DNA.
Wow.
Okay. And he described this experiment in 1944 where a woman named Barbara McClintock, she was doing these experiments with corn plants, and she was kind of a hacker in the best sense of the word. Okay. Like, well, let's throw this system a curveball and see what it does. And she took this corn plant and she damaged its DNA with a little dose of radiation. And she had this idea of what she thought might happen. And what happened was something completely different than what she expected. And it took her a long time to sort all this out. But what she figured out had happened was that I'll give you an analogy of what happened to make it kind of easy to understand. Damaging the plant with radiation, it would be sort of like if somebody took a mystery novel and ripped a page out. And then if you said to somebody, hey, this mystery novel is missing a page, and I want you to fill in the page, and what you have to do is you have to fill it in with words, sentences, and paragraphs that you stole from somewhere else in the book. And you have to paste them together until the book makes sense again. And that is exactly what the plant did. And the plant had to replace the missing page in order to reproduce. Otherwise, it just wouldn't be able to. Well, the plant wanted to reproduce. And so what it did was it went and it borrowed genes and coding sequences from other sections of the DNA and other chromosomes, and it assembled them together. It repaired the damage, and it went on to reproduce. And even in 1944, which was before we really understood DNA, we only knew chromosomes and genes. She figured out from the patterns in the corn, in the the little corn kernel, the colored corn kernels.
Yeah.
She figured out what had happened. She reconstructed what had happened genetically. She came up with a correct answer. And she said, these plants rearranged their own genes and chromosomes because I put them under stress. And they came up with the right answer in real time. Okay? And when I describe this like piecing together a missing page of a mystery novel, it literally is that complicated. Okay, it's not like, oh, there was just some little accidental chemical that got squirted over here, or there's this little bit of DNA that kind of went from here to there. It was actually a very complex operation. And she called these jumping genes, and this led to a whole science called mobile genetic elements. And it turns out that there are huge sections of DNA that alter the expression of genes, and they move around in order to adapt to a constantly changing environment. And so those corn plants really did rewrite their own DNA in real time. And so she went and she presented this at a symposium 7 years later in 1951 in Cold Spring Harbor. Like, she really did her homework. She got her story straight. She presented this, and everybody just looked at her like, woman, you got to be crazy. Okay. Half of the audience was just kind of chuckling, like, what kind of nuttiness is this? And the other half of them were just mad, like, woman, plants don't rearrange their own DNA. The DNA makes the plant does not make the DNA. In fact, there was a guy 40 years before named Wiseman who had declared that the DNA makes the plant doesn't make the DNA, basically. And it had already been cemented into biology that it has to be this way. And so nobody was open to hearing what she had to say. And so she just, like, more or less stopped publishing her work for 20 years, but she kept doing it. And you know what happened? She won the Nobel Prize in 1983. She was absolutely right all along. And her picture is on a postage stamp, and she's absolutely one of the greatest biologists of all time. And even today, you can read her papers, and you can see she had extraordinary insight that nobody at the time had. In fact, Dr. Shapiro, who wrote the paper that originally got sent to me, he says he thinks she's the greatest biologist of the 20th century, and I agree. Now, what I just told you is how evolution actually works.
Now, would you say that in all organisms there are regenerative and defense mechanisms just built into the DNA to a certain extent? Because as humans, we're not regrowing limbs as certain reptiles are able to do. But do you agree that that's all built into DNA for the most part?
That is all built in. It's built into the cells. Okay, the cells have the ability. Nearly every cell in existence has the ability to cut, splice, rearrange its DNA. In addition to that, nearly every cell in existence has the ability to take certain sections of DNA and switch them on and off based on what it needs. So it'd be sort of like graying out software menus or commenting out software code. Hey, I don't want to use that little subroutine right now. Shut it off. So for example, if you start taking guitar lessons and you get calluses on your hands, what is happening to produce those calluses is the cells in your skin are switching genes on and off. They're not taking them away. They're not moving them around. They're just switching them on and off so that, for example, the dead skin cells stay there longer, because all of this is controlled by genetic expression. And so your body, every cell in your body is constantly responding to its environment. So if you lived in a cold environment and all this, if you used to live in Boston and you moved to Houston, and all of a sudden your body has to get used to being in a hot, humid climate, your body will epigenetically adjust over a period of time, and and the gene expression will actually change so that you can exist in that hot environment. And what has come to light mostly just within the last 10 years is that those adaptations can be then inherited, so that what goes on in your body can get signaled to the reproductive cells to change the expression of genes in the sperm and egg so that the children are more adapted to the hot or cold environment.
This is some fascinating stuff, because a lot of people, like the other scientists you mentioned, they won't believe that DNA can actually be altered by your living environment.
This is one of the most fundamental discoveries of modern science and medicine, is that this is true. And, it's interesting, to be on your podcast. A lot of the podcasts that are interviewing me are health, nutrition, and fitness podcasts where the switching on and off of genes is it's a household word. This is called epigenetics. And it's one of the hottest fields in science today. So what you eat, what you drink, how you exercise, how you smoke actually affects your children. Mm-hmm. In fact, I've got a friend at UCLA. His name is John Torday, and he is in the pediatrics and evolutionary medicine department. And he has, for 30 years, he's been studying the effects of secondhand smoke on children. That's been his main research topic. And I had lunch with him about 4 or 5 months ago when I was in California. And he told me, he says, Perry, there are 300 effects of secondhand smoke on children that have been documented. He goes, you'll never guess what the number one effect of secondhand smoke is. And I go, I'll never guess. What is it? He goes, it is epigenetic changes passed from a grandmother to a daughter to a granddaughter because the grandmother smokes. Mm-hmm. Now, let me explain what he's really saying. He's saying the grandmother could have died before the granddaughter was born. Okay? Like no secondhand smoke as we think of it, right?
Right.
Okay? They never even met each other, never in the house, never was sleeping in her crib with a smoker in the room. But the grandmother's body epigenetically adapted to the toxins in the cigarette smoke. Those epigenetic switchings got passed to her daughter, which got passed to the granddaughter, and those epigenetic switches that the granddaughter inherited are the number one effect of the grandmother smoking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one thing I talk about all the time. Is there's a study I heard about years ago, to where they say that your great grandfather, his living diet is what creates your current metabolism as a great grandchild. And the example I heard was, if your great grandfather lived throughout famine and did not eat very much, somehow that in turn lengthens the great grandchild's lifespan. Is that the same type of epigenetic altering? You're
exactly right, and you're at least in the ballpark. Mm-hmm. Because there's been a bunch of study of children from the Dutch famine of 1944. And in Holland, all the food was getting diverted to the Nazis, and nobody was eating, and there were mothers who were pregnant during a famine. And in fact, I believe Audrey Hepburn, the famous actress, was one of those children. And those children had a different metabolism. They had a metabolism that was optimized for a low-calorie diet, because they were conceived in a famine. And so what we're describing here is just the tip of the iceberg of an extraordinarily complex process that none of the traditional Darwinian evolutionists ever accepted. Okay? So what we're talking about is the idea that learned experiences and environmental factors can be passed on to your children. Okay? Now, that idea is at least 200 years old. There was a guy named Lamarck, who was a French scientist, who espoused this idea 200 years ago. Darwin believed that this was true, although he didn't have the slightest idea how it was true, because he didn't know anything about genetics at all. Okay? But Lamarck said it, Darwin said it. Well, in the 1930s and 40s, the genetics and biologists, they thought they knew more than they did, and they formulated something called the neo-Darwinian synthesis, which is basically the version of evolution that everybody has heard and is on all the textbooks. And that version of evolution says all the genetic changes that lead to evolution are purely random and accidental. They don't have any goals or anything like that, and you can't pass learned traits onto your children. You just can't do it. It's impossible. And there's several names for it. One's called the Weismann barrier. One's called the central dogma of biology. They pound it into people's heads. None of this stuff exists. Well, in the last 20 years, all of that has been completely overturned. And the way evolution actually works is so completely different than what's in most textbooks and most popular media and science. It's not even funny. And in fact, most of the version most people have heard is just simply wrong. It's just wrong. And so if you have a friend who's a creationist or an intelligent design person, they go, I don't buy all that. Well, they're smart for not buying it, because traditional, like old school evolutionary theory just is beleaguered with very severe problems. And it's really being really kind of smashed to bits and reformulated right now. And the whole field is in a state of flux right now.
Man, I love this subject matter. I could talk about this all day. How do you feel that Evolution 2.0 can enhance the lives of my listeners?
It makes a big difference if we live in a purposeful universe versus a purposeless universe. Do we live in a billiard balls banging around in the universe and it's all random accidents and it's just chance and selection and survival of the fittest and there is no direction to it all? Or are living things purposeful? Are living things adaptive? I would submit to you that the old school Darwinian theory is a tragically disempowering view of the world. It says that really all the progress on Earth is an accumulation of random accidents, that there is no engineering in your hand, and that everything we see here is just a result of chance and luck. And furthermore, most of those guys will even question whether you and I even have free will or not, because since we're all just walking bags of chemicals, you might think you're making decisions, but it's really just chemicals banging around in your brain, and it makes the appearance of you're making decisions, but you're just a walking bag of chemicals. I say, first of all, that's crap, and second all, it takes all of your power away as a human. In fact, it dehumanizes you.
Right, absolutely.
What's the truth about your hand? The truth about your hand is that trillions of cells over billions of years have optimized and split tested and engineered your hand through the power that is innate to all living things, which none of us really understand. That's the truth. Okay, and that our choices make a difference. If you decide what to eat, you decide whether you're going to smoke or not, you decide what to put in your body, you decide how to exercise, you decide what to put in your mind, you decide what to study, and that makes a difference for you. It makes a difference for your children, for your grandchildren, and it's on you. And you do have a choice. And it's a complete 180 from the reductionist, atheist view of the world.
When did you first really get interested in modern technology and computers? Because you are of an electrical engineering background. What really got you into it?
Audio systems and speakers. It was when I was 12 years old and I wanted a great stereo and I couldn't afford one because I had no money, and so I ended up building a pair of speakers for $60 that were as good as the ones in the store for $200, and that was an unforgettable experience. And when I got done with it, it's like, hey, I still got a whole catalog of all these speaker parts and stuff. I want to try all these other things. How can I do that? Like, well, the answer was, well, you have to turn this into a business and start selling stuff. Otherwise, you won't have money to try anything. And so I started a speaker business. I sold my first pair of speakers to a guy from an ad in the newspaper when I was 14. And by the time I was 17, I was selling a line of speakers in a local audio dealer in my hometown of Lincoln, Nebraska. And that's what got me into electrical engineering. And so I still do that. It's still a hobby. It's still, I still like work on these little engineering projects, and they keep getting more sophisticated. Now I'm doing digital signal processing and, all these, complex things. But all of that experience in analog and digital signal processing, and then later digital networking, because of a career move I made, I ended up selling factory equipment. It gave me this huge background knowledge of how digital data works. And one of my biggest epiphanies, so let me tell you one little piece, and then I'll bring these two subjects together of evolution and technology, because they really do go together. So in 2002, I published a book called Industrial Ethernet, because at the time I was working in manufacturing, and it's a book about how the ones and zeros go across the wire, which, if you have insomnia, all you have to do is buy my $89 Ethernet book on Amazon, and we will help your insomnia. We will put you to sleep. Okay. All right. But seriously, if you're in the field, it's actually very fascinating stuff. And so I wrote this book about how the packets are put together and how the ones and zeros go back and forth across the wire. And I wrote this book for the world's largest trade association, Professional Society of Process Engineers, the ISA, and that book is actually now in its third edition this year, so it's still going. Well, I had this giant epiphany, and this was, I don't know, maybe a few weeks after this argument with Brian in the Chinese bus after I'd come home. I was like, okay, they're saying that mutations in DNA produce evolution. So what is a DNA mutation and how does that work? And I'm reading all about DNA, and I'm starting to see that it's got this data structure. There's a genetic coding table that's in all the biology books, and there's these different kinds of DNA. And suddenly, like, I had probably the biggest epiphany I've ever had in my life. It suddenly struck me, wait a minute. I've seen this before. I have seen this before. Where have I seen? This is in my Ethernet book.
Oh.
The structure of a gene and the structure of an Ethernet packet are almost the same.
Wow, that's kind of spooky.
Oh, it was incredibly spooky. It was like do. I mean, man, Twilight Zone, dude. Look at this. And I looked and I dug further and oh my word. Okay. Remember, I mentioned earlier, electrical engineering degree with emphasis in communication systems and control systems. And guess what? DNA transcription and translation with RNA and all that stuff, that is a digital communication system, and all the rules apply. And you know what? They both have error detection. They both have error correction. They both have instructions. Hey, I didn't get that. Send me another one. When cells reproduce, they have this very sophisticated process that checks for errors, and it runs in 3 stages. In the first stage, you'll get the error rate down to 1 in 10,000. The second stage will get you down to 1 in a million, and the third stage gets you down to 1 in a billion. Like 1 error per billion DNA letters copied. Okay? And if they can't do it correctly, it will abort the operation and kill the cell. And the cell will get eaten by the body, and it will tell it to start over. That's called apoptosis. All of that happens. It's just like when your Ethernet router is trying to your phone is trying to get Wi-Fi from your router, and somebody turns on a microwave oven and it corrupts the signals. And it's like, oh, abort that signal, like just send it over, start from scratch, send it over again, which happens all the time. You know, and when it keeps failing, your cell phone drops. You get a dropped call. It's all the same, man. It's all the same.
It feels kind of like a subliminally biologically created system that humans created something that is of themselves.
Yes. We thought we invented this stuff in the 1950s, and it was in our bodies 3 billion years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, that's so fascinating.
Is that trippy?
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't it just flip? Like, it makes your brain melt. It's like, oh my word, this is crazy.
Yeah, that's some amazing stuff there. I never put those two things together, but man, the correlation is incredible. Today, what's one of the main things you really love about technology and how it's changing the world as we know it?
Well, you know, it's thrilling and it's scary, right?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. I mean, both. I mean, you can't talk about the positives without acknowledging the negatives. You know, and I think that, look, I think I heard a statistic, something like 300,000 people get connected to the power grid every day or something like that. I think Dr. Jordan Peterson said that. He's probably right. You know, and you know, modern commerce and stuff is lifting people out of poverty, and I think that's all incredible. And I also think, well, you know, one of the reasons that I wrote Evolution 2.0 is this. A lot of humans think we're smarter than nature, and a lot of humans think that nature proceeds by random accident, but now we're going to take over our evolution and do it right. And I think that's very, 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 very dangerous. It's wrong. We are not smarter than nature. Nature is smarter than us. And now we can do one of two things with all this technology and all this biotech. So, for example, there's a technology, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called CRISPR.
Yeah.
And it's the ability to edit DNA now at will.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In fact, I heard somewhere that you can buy a CRISPR kit for $138 somewhere and, like, you know, do genetic engineering in your basement if you want.
Yeah.
Which is positively frightening. Okay. Okay. Now we can be humble, and we can say, we can't design a hand. Nature did. Let's learn what she did and how she did it. Let's take all of these biochemical and bioinformatics tools and the genome sequencing. Let's be very humble and let's try to piece together what's really going on here. Or we can go, hey, you know, since this is all billiard balls banging around the universe and random accidents, and we know that, so we're intentional, nature isn't, so now we can fix all nature's mistakes. That's ego, that's pride, it's hubris, and it's wrong. And if you're not careful, it'll kill 1 billion people in 3 weeks.
If you're altering, you know, DNA to compensate for sicknesses and certain genetic mutations, cancers and, lifespans and things like that. Is it safe to say that nature will compensate, on the other hand, therefore making all of our alterations bad?
Well, what you're going to have is you're going to have this huge law of unintended consequences. Okay, so I insist that we understand about 5% of evolution and the human genome and all that. I think we understand about 5% of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, 95% of it is a complete freaking mystery. Okay, and so like there's all these things and they're incredibly tempting. It's like, we could just fix this little thing. We could just fix that little thing. But if you start reading the papers and looking at the studies, it's somewhere in my inbox and I would have to go dig it up. But somebody sent me a paper the other day where somebody did some of this editing, and then all of a sudden they came back a few weeks later and the cells had made all of these other little domino effect changes in response to the editing.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And nobody really knows what happened.
Oh.
Okay. Now, I would argue that the cell knows exactly what it did.
Oh yeah.
But we don't know what the cell was doing. And, it's not like we can take it to Starbucks, buy it a cup of coffee, and ask it what happened. Okay. And so, like, we really need to be very, very, very cautious about this stuff. And, like, one of the problems that's going on, so they've sequenced all these genomes. Like, there are, like, the cloud is stuffed with gigabytes and terabytes and petabytes of genome sequencing, okay? And one of the biggest problems in science right now is they're trying to use big data to figure all this out, but they don't really have a Rosetta Stone. It'd be like if there was 1 million newspapers written in Klingon, and you didn't know Klingon, but you were trying to figure out what it all meant by counting words. Hey, we found this word 177,000 times. So, okay, yeah, well, I guess it's an important word, but you still don't know what it means. I mean, this is where we're at. Like, the Human Genome Project was super awesome, and they sequenced it all, but all the promises about how it was going to tell us all this stuff haven't really panned out the way they said it would. In fact, I got a good friend of mine, Dr. Dennis Noble. He's the man who figured out the cardiac rhythm in the 1960s, which made pacemakers possible. And he's one of the top 100 scientists in the UK. And somebody was asking him about this, and they said, hey, what do you think of 23andMe? And he goes, I think it's great. He goes, but you know what? He goes, if I get your 23andMe data, I'll have a 25% indication of this and this and this about your health. He goes, however, if I take a stethoscope, I take your pulse, I take your waist, and like 3 or 4 other like really basic things, he says, I'll have a 75% certainty about your health.
Wow.
He goes, I know more from a 5-minute doctor checkup about how healthy you are than I know from sequencing your entire genome. He goes, if I know, like, did your father die of cancer? Did your mother die of a heart attack? Like, if I just know this, like, really short list of things, I know more than 23andMe tells me. It's because we don't actually know the genetic language. And we've been assuming for the last 75 years that it all evolves accidentally, when it never evolved accidentally ever at all. Okay, so that's heavy, man. Like, proceed with caution.
Now, with the collision of technology and evolution and creationism, how do you think that this may all be altering the years of folklore and thousands of pages of religion and spiritual writings and stuff like that?
Okay, so I think that this whole war between science and religion is fictitious. Okay, I think it's just ridiculous. Okay, and I have to say, I got to blame the Christians as much as anybody else for making it that way. All right, so I can go to the Creation Museum or the Noah's Ark Museum that Ken Ham put together, and I can get this whole story about how modern science is lying to us about everything. But the science is horrible. Okay, now I think I think there was a Noah's Ark, and I think it's a little different than most people think. And if you want a book on that, there's Historical Genesis from Adam to Abraham is a really great book by a friend of mine, and it'll actually go into like, okay, so how does like all this Genesis stuff, like where does this fit in human history? Like, yeah, there was a guy named Adam, and he lived about 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, and there are Sumerian writings about him that are not just in the Bible, but he wasn't the first human, and the Bible doesn't even say he was the first human. Okay, the Bible implies that there were other humans around, which I won't go into unless you really want me to, but see, here's the thing. Science tells you what things are. Science can't tell you why. Religion and spirituality are about why. So science is almost inherently kind of a bottom-up view of the world. And religion and spirituality is a top-down view of the world, and you need both. And I would argue that the best scientists and the best theologians have always known this. If you look at 500 years of science, including our modern time, you will see that many of the greatest scientists were very spiritual people. Okay, Einstein certainly was, Newton, Galileo, Kepler, Copernicus, Maxwell, Schrodinger, Planck, it's more the norm that scientists have, the really good scientists, they have a big appreciation for the mystical, and they're comfortable with unanswered questions, and they're comfortable with ambiguity. It's the amateurs who are afraid of unanswered questions and ambiguity.
Now, let's talk AI, artificial intelligence, for a minute. Do you think AI is a godsend to humanity, or is it an eventual destroyer of worlds and humankind?
Well, that's an awesome question. Okay, so think about movies like The Terminator or Clockwork Orange or Ex Machina or 2001: A Space Odyssey. You notice all those science fiction stories, they have this certain kind of an arc where the AI goes out of control. So if you make your living writing science fiction, then what that means is that the people who like to go to the bookstore and buy a book and read it on an airplane are paying you to think about the future. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And they've thought about the future. Okay, and I think they've thought about the future more accurately than any scientist. Okay, so if we ever get real, true AI, then there will be a whole drama that will play out that will follow the arc of those movies. Now, right now, AI isn't really I. Okay? Like, Siri is as dumb as a box of rocks, and everybody knows it. Okay? Alexa is as dumb as a box of rocks, and everybody knows it. There's nobody in there. Now, if we ever figure out how biology really works, then Siri could come alive. Now, here's kind of how I think about it. I think that if it's discoverable, if it's not just like hidden from us by God forever, if it's discoverable, then we'll eventually figure this out. And the question will be, will we be approaching the subject with humility or with hubris? And I think that makes all the difference. And all I can say is, I know science, I know technology. You can't stop these things. So what you want is you want the good people, the thinking people, the questioning people, the humble people to pursue these things so that Monsanto doesn't own it and kill us all. And that's really what we're looking at, which is why I put together a technology prize, which we haven't even talked about yet.
Yeah, that's the next thing I was going to ask you. It's called Origin of Information. Is that correct?
That's right. The Evolution 2.0 prize is a search for origin of information or chemicals to code. And so remember my little Ethernet genetics epiphany? Like, oh my word, these are the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? Well, it didn't take me too long to figure out that all of the other codes that we know the origin of are designed. So there's a million codes, right? There's HTML, there's barcodes, zip codes, English, Chinese, PHP, blah, 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 JavaScript, all of these codes. And we are swimming in information, right? All of the codes are designed by somebody, and usually really smart people, right? And nobody knows of a code that's not designed. Nobody knows of a way to pour chemicals in your bathtub and stir them up and get codes. And I realized that. And, and for quite a while, I used this as a God argument. And I believe in God. I mean, I'm a Christian. But over time, I slowly my views started to shift. And I started to think, there might be a way to solve this. Like there might be some law of physics that we don't know about. There might be some law of consciousness that we don't know about. And maybe we should start looking for it. And we just need to define the problem really exactly. And so I worked very hard and I defined the problem and I wrote a specification. And if you go to naturalcode.org, we have the specification there. And I have a $3 million technology prize that if somebody can solve this, I have a private equity investment group and they want to patent this thing. And when the patent is granted, we will pay the discoverer $3 million and give this discoverer an equity stake in the company. And this does raise like HAL 9000 kind of questions. And I just think that the people that are working on these questions need to have been thinking about them in a humble frame of mind long before the discovery is actually made. And so that's what we're doing.
Wow. That's an incredible, incredibly huge task.
It is. And, a really high-end biochemist told me the other day, he goes, Perry, this is a moonshot, right? This is like really, really hard. And I go, yeah, I know it's really, really hard, but it's the simplest way of defining the problem that I know. Anything simpler than what I'm asking for doesn't even constitute information or encoding or decoding or digital code. And so like this is what you have to have. And it's in every cell. It's been done by Mother Nature trillions of times, but this is what we're looking for. And this is actually in its earliest form. It's been out for 9 years. And I've never had anybody say, you didn't even define information properly. I stole it right out of an engineering textbook. And I said, hey, this is like your most fundamental definition of information. And if somebody can make this happen without cheating naturally, then, man, that's valuable. That's incredibly valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to buy it.
All right, Perry, I'm going to steer this bus in a different direction. Throughout your journey and your business endeavors and things like that, what do you feel was the most personally unsuccessful time that you had in your life, and how'd you get over it?
That would be my Amway years. That was about 5 or 6 years of my life where, I was going to be a diamond direct distributor, multi-level marketing, okay, so I recruit 6 people, and then you recruit 6 people, and they recruit 6 people. And I was doing all that. And so here's the thing. That didn't really work. It didn't work as advertised. It had all kinds of problems. But I have to say, I developed some skills during those 6 years that I don't think I would have developed anywhere else, that I use every single day. And I got back my investment in all of that in spades. It just came 10 years later. It came in a different form than I thought it would. And there's a saying in the book of Proverbs, in all labor there is profit. And I think that's true. And look, the entrepreneur journey is a hard one. Because you know what entrepreneurship really is? What is that? It's evolution.
I can see that. Yeah, I can see the connection. Definitely.
Okay. It's like, all right, so you put bacteria in a petri dish, and then you put an eyedropper full of some poison in there. They will rearrange their genomes, switch things on and off, exchange DNA with each other until they figure out how to deal with it. They will develop resistance to the antibiotics. And you know what? 95% of them will die in the process. They're trying, but most of them fail. And you know what? That is life on Earth. That is how it works. That's how it's always worked. And it's not accidental. It might be surprising. It might be not what you expected, but it's not an accident. And anybody that's starting a business knows this. Like, well, who knew that product would take off? My goodness. Like, we tried making those 19 other products, and all of us thought that all those other products were better. Or who thought that song would be a hit?
Yeah, I was just talking to one of my entrepreneur buddies yesterday, and we were talking about what areas of the United States to market in. He's in a different country, and he markets a vegan product, but right now he's getting the majority of his sales from Texas. So it seems like we both know nothing. It was pretty funny. It was funny.
I think one of the best things about, if you're a seasoned entrepreneur and you're a serial entrepreneur, like you do multiple things, I think if you have any sense whatsoever, you really do become humble. Like, I know nothing.
Right.
And that is really the starting point. I'll tell you right now, I'm at a point in a part of my business where I'm like, I know nothing. It's like, okay, God, I can't figure this out. Like, you're going to have to give me a clue here because I'm just stuck. And, well, that's usually where the big discovery gets made.
Yep. All right, successors, we'll return to our conversation with Perry Marshall as well as quick success after a word from our sponsors. Spiders Will Eat Your Face. Available on Amazon Prime Instant Watch and Amazon.com. Spiders Will Eat Your Face, the brilliant documentary about the history of pet tarantulas in America. That's Spiders Will Eat Your Face, the movie, now on Amazon. Are you a tense, tired, busy person who works day in and day out, who tends to lack the proper sleep and energy? Using modular supplements, health-related articles, recipes, life hacks, and more, Bellison can help. With quality as high as Bellison, you're buying from a company that cares about the environment and only uses premium vegan supplements. That's Bellison.com. Want to learn how to cook healthy, exercise, and meditate in just 30 minutes a day? Bellison.com. Want to feel healthy, energetic, and focused like me? Bellison.com. To receive a 10% discount at checkout, visit Bellison.com with the coupon code THE4POS. Visit Bellison.com now. That's BELISAN.com. Compassion and quality without compromise. Bellison.com. And we're back with author, speaker, electrical engineer, and consultant Perry Marshall. Now we get into the part of the show I like to call Quick Success, where you, Perry, can inspire the successors to enhance their lives in the areas of knowledge, health, wealth, and spirituality. Perry, what are you currently doing to enhance your knowledge?
Well, I read a lot. I buy tons of books, and I kind of have this process of like quickly skimming through them and figuring out, okay, which one of these 10 books do I really need to zero in on? Because so many books, so little time.
What are you currently doing to enhance your health?
Riding my bike, doing quite a bit of fasting, and eating lots of vegetables.
Fasting. I am an intermittent faster. I love it.
Yep.
What are you currently doing to enhance your wealth?
Oh, a lot. Starting multiple companies, investing in various things, furiously working to reinvent my own company. Lots of stuff in that department.
What are you currently doing to enhance your spirituality?
Every hour I start my day, every day I start with an hour of prayer and meditation. And that is the best habit that I have picked up in the last 10 years.
What do you feel is one of the best pieces of advice you've ever received?
Fail fast.
Simple and powerful. I like that.
Fail fast and next.
Mm-hmm. Are there any modern technologies or apps that help you achieve success?
In concert with my 80/20 sales and marketing book, I made a website, 8020curve.com, and it allows you to put numbers on the disproportion of cause and effect. And so, for example, if 1,000 people go into Starbucks this week and buy a $5 latte, the 80/20 curve tool will tell you, well, one of those people will buy a $2,700 espresso machine. And it tells you how much economic potential is untapped in a group of customers. It's very powerful.
Wow, that's a good metric to get. What new thing, book, activity, or skill are you really excited to learn and dive into?
I just picked up a really interesting book called, oh man, what is it? Impossible to Ignore. And I'm digesting it very slowly because it's about how to be influential by doing things that are memorable. And it's got a lot of interesting science in it.
As far as helping our listeners achieve success in whatever it is they're doing, what piece of advice can you give them?
You can only follow really one major mentor or guru or knowledge source in your career. Let me explain what I mean by that. It's really easy to get on 47 people's email lists and 86 Facebook feeds and Twitter feeds and get this barrage of advice and tips and blog posts and podcasts and everything. Okay. But you cannot make sense of that without a single coherent philosophy. And one of the best things that I did when I was really in the steep upward curve of my early entrepreneur career is basically I only listened to one person. I mean, yeah, sure, I read other things and all that, but really, like, if you're inexperienced and you don't know something, you can't build a coherent philosophy of an entire new field all by yourself. And that means ignoring most things. I mean, really, you've got to ignore 80 to 90% of the stuff that even looks and sounds good.
Yeah, I agree with that. As they say, there's a lot of noise out there.
A lot.
Mm-hmm.
A lot.
Successors, Perry has a special offer for you. Actually, he has two special offers. Perry, what are those?
So if you thought this conversation about evolution was interesting, it's only the tip of the iceberg. You should go to cosmicfingerprints.com and download 3 free chapters of Evolution 2.0. So my book is called Evolution 2.0, Breaking the Deadlock Between Darwin and Design. It's available on Audible, hardcover, Kindle. It's soon coming out in paperback. You can get 3 free chapters at cosmicfingerprints.com. And I think I want to keep it simple, and let's just restrict it to that. If the business stuff sounds interesting to you, you can go to perrymarshall.com. That's my business site. But go get 3 free chapters of Evolution 2.0 at cosmicfingerprints.com.
All right, sounds good. And Perry, how can my listeners connect with you?
I have a Facebook feed, 2.0.evolution for the Evolution 2.0 book, and get on the email list. And on the business side, people could open a support ticket and get a message to my assistant. So, and Antonio, you asked some really great questions here today, and I thought we had a lot of fun.
Yeah, I loved it. I could go on and on. People don't realize that I love this content. I love it. I could talk all day about it.
Maybe you should do a podcast about it. I don't know. Right?
Who knows?
So, hey, thank you for having me on. It was an honor, and I loved all the, kind of the kaleidoscope of things that we covered today.
All right, finally, Perry, what's your definition of success?
That's a good, do I have one? Yes. It's doing what God made you to do, but it's actually bigger than that. Okay. Nobody's asked me that precise question in a long time. So, I believe that the world has a freedom of its own, and so I think when a lot of people say, be what God wants you to be, it's like there's this deterministic path or something. Like there's this prescribed destiny and you're just supposed to figure out what it is. Well, I think that's only half the picture, okay? Because I think that there's a creative element where, you actually get to choose, where it's not just God giving you this assignment, it's also God saying, what do you want to do? And I think success is really the dance between, I think we all have assignments, but then what are you going to do with them? How are you going to make this really interesting? And I think that's what success really is. So I don't know how to crunch that down to a little tidy little phrase, but that's what I think success is.
All right, successors, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Perry Marshall. Please check out more successful free content like this at the4pos.com, as well as rate and review wherever you find podcasts. Thanks for listening and prepare for success. Thanks, Perry.
Thank you. Good interview. Appreciate it.
If you want to be more driven and more motivated in your life or business, go to the4pos.com/free book and grab a copy of my book, Indulge Your Affirmative Motivation Within. 25 Motivations of Personal Development and Life Success. Get it now at the4pos.com/free book. Again, that's the4pos.com/free book. Spiders Will Eat Your Face. Available on Amazon Prime Instant Watch and Amazon.com. Spiders Will Eat Your Face, the brilliant documentary about the history of pet tarantulas in America. That's Spiders Will Eat Your Face, the movie, now on Amazon.